Hello and welcome to Business Reporter's UK 2030 campaign. I'm Alistair Greener. Even before the COVID-19 pandemic, carbon reduction commitments were already making the headlines. Governments and major corporations were all making their ambitions public and challenging others to suit. The clear environmental impact of the lockdown period has provided undisputable evidence of what is possible if we change our behaviour and act more sustainably. But as governments look to restart the economy, emissions are rapidly returning to pre-lockdown levels. Eliminating energy waste and reducing energy consumption are the fastest, least disruptive means we have to combat climate change. Buildings contribute more than half of our total electricity consumption, with energy waste up to 45%. While buildings can be designed to be green, the vast majority of the UK's existing building stock will need retrofitting to eliminate waste and to become carbon neutral. Today we've invited Mike Hughes, the president of Schneider UK and Ireland, to discuss how the costs of making a building smart, sustainable and safe can be offset by the efficiencies created by IoT technologies. Good morning.
Good morning, Alistair. Pleasure to be here.
When decision makers look at new buildings, how much impact does the current crisis of the environment and sustainability make on their decisions?
Up to now, buildings have been seen as quite passive assets. They sit on the balance sheet. People look at their value. And what's changed recently is people start to look at buildings more now as part of the value proposition of the company. It's a projection of the brand of the company. And a lot of that is due to the way that employees are looking at buildings. Employees want to work in buildings which are comfortable, exciting to work in, spacious, but more importantly, they want to work in sustainable buildings. They want to have that feeling that says, I'm working in an office where it is contributing back to this net zero goal or the sustainability goals. So the buildings are becoming very active brand projections of companies. And I think people on the boards of companies are starting to wake up to that point.
Given the fact that there's clearly then a desire to make that change, what's standing in the way of UK buildings improving their performance?
The first point is just awareness, education around how a building can actually become such an important part of your employee value proposition, for example. We've seen many cases where people will move from one company to another because of the building that they're working in. So it's this awareness within the population that is saying, I want to work in a building which is sustainable. I want to work for an employer who takes sustainability serious and gives me an environment which is matching that.
In the introduction, we heard a lot about the scale of energy loss. What about the maintenance costs?
Yeah, well, maintenance costs and energy are directly linked with each other. They go hand in hand. Buildings are some of the biggest energy consumers in the world, and unfortunately some of the most inefficient. And a lot of that inefficiency comes from just the way they are maintained. So if you can maintain the building in a smarter way, if you can make sure that your equipment is always running at peak performance, if you can anticipate in advance when equipment is going to break so you can maintain it before it happens, you can run a building much more efficiently. And the nice thing about that is that you don't have to rebuild the whole building to actually make it run in a much more efficient way. That's where the technology can help.
When you talk about technology, how exactly can things like Internet of Things and sensors, how can that be leveraged to actually help resolve some of these problems?
Today, buildings are running and consuming energy in a very inefficient way, and the biggest challenge is it's invisible. Nobody really knows what's happening. The only visibility most people get on an efficiency of a building today is when they get the bill for the energy consumed. But they don't have a clear view of where that energy is being consumed or how it could be done in a better way. By putting sensors in, as you start to see, the invisible becomes visible. You can get a granularity of visibility that helps you to understand what's happening in this part of my building. Why am I using so much energy at 5 o'clock in the morning when nobody is there? Why is my heating and ventilation coming on at 5 o'clock in the morning when nobody comes in until 8? And this is the beauty of IoT and sensor technology. It's becoming extremely cheap. It's easy to install, even on old buildings. You then have an IoT network which is just taking this data, analyzing this data, and suddenly you can see where you're consuming your energy, and that allows you to make the decisions you need to make to then say, okay, let's be more efficient in this area. Let's change the heating and ventilation filters on this to be more efficient.
Okay, let's look at Schneider Electric now. What's your approach to a smart building?
Yes, well, we are a technology company, so we are all about IoT, building management systems, etc. So, of course, if we are taking this message to the market that by using technology you can drive sustainability in buildings, we also have to try to be the best in class at that. So we take great care to make sure that all of our buildings are being as energy efficient as possible. Now, we even have a number of projects, some of our buildings around the world, which have actually become energy positive. Now, what that means is they actually consume less energy than they generate because we put solar panels outside, or we might have some in-feed from wind turbines, etc. Now, that's very exciting because suddenly buildings go from being these poor energy consumers, causing a lot of issues around carbon into the atmosphere, and suddenly they're actually generating more energy than they can actually consume. The second thing we do is we make sure that we understand for each building in our fleet, what is the energy consumption? What is the carbon footprint by installing our own technology and making sure we're driving programs month over month that is reducing both energy and carbon. Then we like to take that data, we publish it officially, and it's highly viewed. People really want to see quarter over quarter what's happening on our carbon footprint.
Okay, let's say I'm one of those CEOs who does see it as being highly viewed. What's the first step for me if I want to launch a smart building project?
If you're one of the people that is designing a brand new building, the options for you now are just fantastic. The technology you can build in, you can conceive even getting a net zero building. If you're upgrading an existing building, it's all about how do I retrofit? How do I put in more sensor technology so that I can see where the energy consumption is happening? So the starting point is the key point, and then determining what your end point is. How good do you want it to be? What is a good energy consumption per meter squared that you want to target? And then having clear objectives along the way. Being realistic, I think, is very important. It's not something that changes overnight. These are around behaviors. You can put in the technology, but you have to also drive the behaviors behind to make the efficiencies happen.
Okay, I understand what you're saying, but there's actually different extremes here. There's where we are now and where we actually want to be and what's in our way. So, for example, if you've got a building where you don't have control, say, of the gas heating, what can you do in those situations?
For example, at Schneider today in the UK, we're 96% renewable energy. We buy it from companies that supply green renewable energy. But I have 4%, which is gas. And this is a classic situation where I'm working with a legacy fleet of buildings where a lot of the heating system is gas. Now, I cannot just disconnect the gas and, everybody's going to get very cold. So then I can start to do two things. One is, how can I be as efficient as possible with everything else, reduce my energy consumption to the maximum, squeeze out the last kilowatt hour of saving that I can. But on the gas, then I have to take another option, which is maybe to go for offsetting, where I can offset the carbon footprint of that by buying funds, ESG funds, etc. Planting trees is typically how people think about that, to offset the carbon footprint. So the future is really about where are you starting from, what is the legacy you're starting from, what is within your control to change, and how ambitious are you from the beginning in terms of saying, can I get to a net zero energy positive building? The technology is there to do it. It's really about the restrictions you have and your ambition.
So maybe you can give us some specific examples of the technologies that you've used to help organisations smarten up their image and improve their operations.
In the UK, we've been working with companies like Tottenham Hotspur, the new stadium. They were absolutely keen to have the latest technology so they could run the stadium in the most efficient way. We've worked with hospitals like Moorfields Hospitals. We work with hotels. We work with banks. Hilton Hotels is a big partner for us in energy efficiency. So we tend to work across the entire building space because that's where the large energy consumption is and that's where big efficiencies can be made.
Now, there's a lot of definitions out there. There's a lot of different protocols out there. Tell us about Schneider. What protocol do you sign up to?
Now, at Schneider, we take the topic very seriously because we are in the business, of course, of promoting technology into this market that we provide. So, of course, we want to make sure that we're using it ourselves and setting an example on that. At Schneider Electric, we have committed to be carbon neutral by 2025.
And to be able to achieve all of those goals you've talked about, there's going to be some emerging technologies coming up. What are those? What are you seeing in the future?
Yes, I think it will start with embedding more sensor technology. I think it will be about having data analytics that are then taking those data and analyzing them. And then I think you will also see a lot of AI and machine learning being used to automatically make decisions, which are programming the maintenance, for example. So it's going to become a much more digital, integrated, sustainable story as we go forward. It's a very, very exciting times for buildings. I think it's probably the first time in 100 years that buildings have been at such an important inflection point from becoming passive energy consuming assets to being value proposition, brand projection and energy generating assets.
Well, interesting and certainly an exciting future for smart buildings, and it'll be really interesting to see how their impact on our environment changes over that period of time as well. It's been fascinating finding out more. Mike Hughes from Schneider Electric, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.